weeks, as you know, the Department of Defense has threatened to furlough up to 200,000 federal employees and contractors, using them as pawns in this battle that we are engaged in. This is on the heels of Congress just sending the President a $460 billion defense spending bill. We don't believe that federal employees should be used as bargaining chips in this process, and the fact is that the Department is forcing these furloughs when they could be pushing them further out into the year. Regardless of where we stand on the issue of the war, the members of the delegation of the National Capital Region are wholly united in not wanting federal employees to be in any way used as pawns, and we think it can be avoided. We all sent a letter to Defense Secretary Gates urging him to delay furloughing until absolutely necessary, because there are other tools that can extend the department's funding. We have a chart here that describes tools, and so that the Congressional Research has prepared. At this point, I want to turn to the Majority Leader of the House of Representatives to share with you his thoughts, and then we'll hear from Congressman Davis and Congresswoman Norton. Thank you. Senator.
Thank you very much. One of the facets of the Washington metropolitan area members has been our ability to work very, very closely together in a bipartisan way. And I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues representing Washington, D.C., Holmes Norton. John Sarbanes, our newest member, Washington Metropolitan Caucus. Tom Davis, my good friend, with whom I've worked very, very closely on federal employees and metro issues. Right at the District of Columbia, represents the voting member of the Congress of the United States. A continuing objective of this leadership. And we're going to be hopefully doing something.
And the regional delegation.
And the regional delegation, who were united on that issue. And my friend Jim Moran from the state of Virginia. First of all, let me say to the federal employees of the Washington metropolitan area, there are not going to be any furloughs. Notwithstanding the fact that some people may perceive contracts as requiring notice of the federal employees, there are not going to be any furloughs. This Congress is not going to shut down the government. This Congress is sure that there are appropriate funds. The CRS has already indicated that there are sufficient funds through March of next year to fund the operation of the Defense Department. In this context, the non-Iraq, non-Afghanistan facets of the Defense Department. We are absolutely convinced that is the case, and we think, therefore, that every employee ought to know, and the American public ought to know. Notwithstanding rhetoric that may be used for the purposes of pressing political positions, the federal government will not be required to furlough any of its employees, and we don't believe that's going to happen. We will work together to ensure that that is the case. I want to thank Ken, Tom Davis, Ellen Norton, and John Sarbanes, and so many others. On the Senate side, we work equally in a bipartisan fashion with Senator Warner there, with Senator Webb and Senator Cardin, and Senator McCullough from my state, and many others who understand that sending messages to people 2 weeks before Christmas is a unsettling, to say the least, act. I really want to be here with my colleagues to assure every federal employee that there will be no furloughs caused by the continuing discussions on the levels of appropriations. We have funded the Defense Department for almost $500 billion. Was signed into law by the President. There are certainly sufficient funds to ensure that employees stay on the job. So I thank my colleagues for their leadership and for their work in this regard, and we'll continue to work with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. I know you have to get back to the caucus. We really appreciate your being here and your statements. There are a number of other people who very much wanted to be here as well, and who unfortunately couldn't. Chris Van Hollen, for example, very much wanted to be here. He signed on the letter, and Frank Wolf, who also has an engagement that he can't get out of. But let me turn now to the most effective member of the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives, Tom Davis.
Well, thank you, Jim, and I associate myself with Stenny's words that on these issues there's no partisanship. This goes back to a relationship that we have had for my 13 years in the House, where the regional delegation has pulled together on issues affecting federal employees and the budget disputes. You know, no matter who's to blame for the funding standoff, and I think there's plenty of blame to go around in this, the fact that here we are in December and some of the bills haven't even gone up to the White House and we're sitting in the midst of these arguments. I can't sit idly by and let this administration or anybody else solve this problem on the back of federal employees. We have been through this before. The Department of Defense has other options to delay furlough than delaying federal employees. Granted, there are shortcomings with each option, and that's why we'd be best to just get the parties to resolve this issue as quickly as possible. I think it's of great importance to look after the civilian and the contract workers who are going to suffer because of this fight and get notices at Christmas time. We're concerned this sends a terrible message to those people who are in college, who might be considering federal service. Every year your livelihood can be used as a bargaining chip between the parties and between the legislative and executive branch. That's just wrong. It's not the way to inspire people to government service. We're saying this: if there are options, use them. Furloughs should be the last resort, not Plan A. I want to note, in addition to the chart that Jim has put up here, there are even other options that the administration can consider to keep federal employees from being bargaining chip. One is the Feed and Forage Act, which permits obligations of funds in advance of appropriations for what was called the Feed and Forage. There are extensive precedents. If you take a look back to the Vietnam War, in today's dollars, over $7 billion was obligated and spent during that time in advance of appropriation. So there are ways where we can get through the longer haul here without having to put our federal employees and our workforce at risk.